Well, good morning. You know, Dan set the precedent last week, so we thought we would just sit up here and preach rather than stand up, so until we get told no, we're just going to do it. So see if that stays there. Anyways, thank you for being here this morning. We are excited to talk to you this morning about faith versus science, and in this is Awkward series. I'm Josh. I'm the Student Ministries Director here at Sparta Center Church. This is Michael Brooks. He's an elder with us here at SCC, and we're just privileged to be here with you this morning. Just want to run through kind of what this is going to look like. Obviously, it looks a little different. We're feeling really comfortable up here, so who knows where it's going to go.
It wouldn't be me up here if I wasn't struggling with a mic.
Yeah, you can just figure out that mic, and we'll get to you when you're ready there. That's fine.
Thank you, Tori.
You know what they say, when Ben is away, the children will play yet again.
There we go.
But Dan said he's going to watch us and make sure we're on point. So
All right.
we'll behave, I'm sure of it.
Thank
So.
you, Tori.
But thank you for being here. Let me just walk you through what this is going to look like this morning. Obviously, this is going to be a little less formal than we're used to. It's going to be more conversational intentionally because not only do we want to talk about just the awkwardness between the grounding in faith that we find, and then there's a grounding in science that a lot of people find. And what we want to talk about is that they're actually not really pitted against each other. They actually work in tandem, and they actually rely on each other, and so we want to talk about that a little bit today. We want to get you involved a little bit in this, so don't be scared or nervous. It's going to be fine, but we're going to want just some Q&A stuff from you at the end as well. So what we really want you to intentionally do is to write on your papers that you got this morning, your bulletins, any questions you might have about anything we're talking about, because I'll be honest, I still don't understand it all perfectly. There's a lot of questions that I have, and I didn't understand it all at first, and what got me into it was the curiosity of like, wow, I don't quite understand that. They're using these big words and talking about these different things, and what does all this mean? So please write down questions as you go. If we're saying something and you're like, yeah, I missed that, or I don't understand what you just said, or that sounds like Spanish, please just write it down, and we'd love to try and answer it for you at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through it. I'm going to walk through the science part of it first and just talk a little bit about how science is really defined. I'm going to talk about a cause and effect relationship that we see when science approaches different things, and then we're going to talk about why does science need God in the first place. And so, Mike, could you tell us what you're going to be covering today?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about faith, and the goal is to be shorter, okay? I know that might be shocking. I'm going to try to be shorter than Josh, all right, in terms of time, and really talk about how the Christian faith has a strong voice, answering the biggest questions in our culture, having confidence about our faith, and how it actually can offer the best answers, and so that's what I'll be talking about. And then also, I would like to one thing we want to do in this series is model how to have a conversation. So hopefully there's going to be opportunity between Josh and I. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Tori.
So many
We're just
problems.
lost sheep up here. We don't know what we're doing.
I think what's going to happen is they're going to be like, all right, Mike, they got to come in here for like a training time, and then I can get it all figured out. So one of the things we want to do is model how to have a conversation, how to restate what somebody says, how to ask good questions, so that hopefully you guys can feel more equipped in these awkward or tense conversations to actually have them.
Yeah, good. So does that sound good? Are we on the same page? Give me a woo.
Yes. There we go.
Good. You got to get a little excited. So, all right. We are going to respect your time at the end as well. We will dismiss on time as normal. We want our workers to be respected and getting your kids out and everything like that. But if you have more questions when we're done and you're like, I need to know this, please hang out because we're willing to stay later and just ask and have the conversations and talk to you about questions we have. But before I get into the science, I just want to talk about if there's a baseline thing that we want to get across today, this is kind of what we talked about. We said science works in harmony with a robust biblical faith rooted in a God of order, evidence, and design. And so we're going to see how these two things work in tandem. But would you agree that often we end up in camps? We end up in like a science camp that can explain everything we know, or we end up in a faith camp where not only do we say it can explain everything we know, but often we don't know how it explains everything we know. We just say that it does. And then you hear things like, well, that's just like a God of the gaps theory. You can't explain it, so there's no answer for it. So if you just say God, that just answers the question, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But let's talk about how science is defined. If we can go to the next slide here. The hard part about this is that science does not have one hard definition. You can go to many different websites and
That's crazy to
in
me
different
also,
places.
by the way.
Yeah, it just has all kinds of different definitions to it, as you can see there. From Webster has a different one, Wikipedia, sciencecouncil.org, which is one of the bigger science websites that you can get. But it all kind of boils down to one definition that I want to bring about us today that actually ChatGPT gave to us. Yeah, I just used ChatGPT. It's fine.
Starting out with some controversy.
That's right. Good. So science is the systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the natural world through observation, experimentation, and evidence-based reasoning. An easy way to say that is it basically studies causes and effects. Science studies causes and effects and how they work together. So as an example of that, if you go to the next slide, if you think of an effect, what's an effect? Anybody just shout out an effect that you might know. All right, I'll give you one. How about an explosion? An explosion is an effect. I love rockets, so I use rockets because that's just cool. If you ever watch anybody ever watched a rocket launch before in their life, like live? Anybody? Couple? It's one of the coolest things ever. But you get a lot of explosion in a rocket launch, right? The effect is this explosion, and what science will do often is they'll say, okay, here's something that happened. We need to reason back to the effect of that, or the cause of that, excuse me. And so when we look at the cause of maybe when an explosion happens, if you go to the next slide, we can easily say that, okay, well, there's fuel source, right, usually. There's air that requires combustion, and then there's an ignition source. So it can go back and it can break those things down and it can show you how something came about. So the effect was something happened and we observed it, and then we have to go back to the cause of it. And one of the things that I'm going to argue is that we know God by his effects. And when we see the effects of God, we can reason back to who God is. But when we talk about causes, we also need to talk about two different types of causes. There's an intelligent cause, which would be personal or supernatural perhaps, and then a non-intelligent or a natural way. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and I want you to tell me, do you think this is a natural cause or an intelligent cause? Just shout your answers out. Okay, who says intelligent? Raise your hand. Who says natural? Okay, I would agree with that. I would say this is probably a natural cause. Now, many will argue, was this over billions and billions and billions of years of water streaming through, or was there maybe a giant flood that did something? I don't know. There's options there, but we know that that was some type of natural cause. Let's go to the next one. What? Why is that funny?
Apparently the presidents are funny.
I guess. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a little funny looking, but anyways. All right, so who thinks this is a natural cause? All right, who thinks this is an intelligent cause? Okay, right, so you can see an effect. We find something, we discover something. Both of them are mountains. They're both rock formations. They're both made out of the earth, but at one of them you can say, this probably happened by natural processes. And the other one you can say, there's probably a mind behind that, because we wouldn't just look at that and think an earthquake happened and all of a sudden we got some of the best presidents we've ever had up on a mountain. So, hey, that's how that works. Let's go to the next slide. When we look at the universe around us, and the stars, and the planets, and the Milky Way, I love Psalm 19 that says that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. We were talking yesterday about how, you can observe what we can see here, and then you think about how much more we have now with telescopes and the Hubble and the James Webb telescopes, and just the things that we can see that even more now just emphasize how true this statement is. But I would ask this question, that when you look at the universe and the complexity and the fine-tuning, do you think intelligent design or do you think natural causes? When we look at the universe, we observe its size. It's huge, like giant. I think the analogy was if you shrunk just our universe, or the Milky Way that we are in, so sun, Milky Way, and everything goes around it, so that universe, down to the size of a white blood cell, the size of space as we know it, just within our universe, would be the United States. If that tells you how big just our universe is, and that's not talking about the billions of other universes that are outside of where we are, it is immense and huge. I think we'd agree its complexity is just mind-boggling. Its beauty is just, amazing. It's fine-tuning, which we're going to talk about a little bit, the things that are required for it to even exist in the first place. But science often would tell us that this is an effect of random processes over millions of years, and somehow we got to where we are today. Now, I think there's maybe some ways that you can mesh that with the Christian faith. I think in other ways, maybe not. It depends on where you land on those things. And I would remind us that that's probably a secondary issue when it comes to that kind of thing. We know God created, and that's the most important part. But the heavens declare the glory of God, and I think that is one of the most outstanding ways to show how faith and science come together is when we research the universe. A couple things I want to talk about when it comes to the universe, just to kind of nail this point home of how we know the complexity of the universe and how it's put together. One of them is just what's called the gravitational force constant. I know we're going to use a lot bigger words here, but basically just gravity and the way that it works. The idea that if gravity was off by like a minuscule percentage, like more gravity or less gravity, nothing around us could exist the way that it does. The universe couldn't stay together the way that it does. Our planets couldn't stay in the distances that they are. There's this thing called dark energy that we've recently discovered, and it's a very consistent force in dark energy. In the
You're
same
not talking
way.
about the force?
Not the force, not like moving the table over, or you will believe what I say, but it's more
That would
like
be nice.
the energy that we don't quite understand in space. It's very consistent. But they say that if it was off by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, which is like, I can't even tell you how small that is, we couldn't exist where we are today. The way that electromagnetic forces work, right? Magnets, but it also keeps atoms together, and it allows you to do chemistry. In fact, if the electromagnetic forces were off by almost that small, minuscule amount, like atoms couldn't form together, there'd be no water, no air, no us, nothing. We would just dissipate, and there'd be nothing here. The Earth's position and where it's at in the universe, like that much closer to the sun, and we'd be all baked into toast, and that much farther away, we'd freeze. And yet we're perfectly placed going around this giant ball of gas to keep us warm. It just doesn't make sense. Like, how is there that, like, in and around us to keep us the way that we are? I think it's important to understand that when we can look at the complexities of these things through science and we can see how amazing it is, I think the evidence is overwhelming that there is a God who created, and we're going to see how those work together. So let's keep getting definitions to confuse us some more. So we're going to go to the fact that there's 2 types of science that we can talk about if you go to the next slide. There's empirical science, and then there's historical science. So you can see the differences there. There's the way that things operate. We do science to figure out how things work or those type of things. And then historical science, where they came from or how they originated. And so if you go to the next slide there, I'd like us to ask the question, what caused the Model T to be born? Henry Ford or the laws of internal combustion? This is the interactive portion of the day.
And it's not a trick question.
And it's
right?
not a trick question.
Okay.
Who would say Henry Ford? Who would say the laws of internal combustion? Who would say you're both probably right? I would agree. Who would agree that you need both of those things in order to have a Model T, right? If you go to the next slide, you need both. So what science can do is science can go back and it can talk about how the thing came about, or maybe how it operates, or you have to have this to have this to have this, and it's all put together. But what it can't do is just look at the Model T and know why it's there, or technically who made it. In the same way that we can't just look around us and just say, we know who made it because we can test it, right? To say science can disprove the existence of God is like saying a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford through the laws of internal combustion. It just doesn't make sense. And so we have to look at this science lens between 2 lenses, one of historical science and then one of empirical science. And so if we could go on to the next slide there. I actually brought something here with me. We're going to get to CSI. Let me grab something.
Best part of the entire time, by the way. It's cake if you're confused. It really is cake.
All right, so just kind of shout out to me. What can science tell us about that cake? Anybody? The ingredients, okay, yep.
That's a good answer. There we go.
What else? How you make it, perhaps, yep. Maybe what temperature it's baked at and those kinds of things. What else? How it rises, yep. What else? I heard something over here.
Tino said something.
Tino? How it tastes? Maybe.
That's an interesting
That's an
one.
interesting one. I haven't thought about that. Yeah. maybe what the materials are, right? Maybe it can tell us how it can be adhered to the side of the cake, how that frosting can stay on it. I would say that the questions that science maybe can't help us understand is, why is it there? Why is that cake there? Can we test why the cake is there? I don't know. Can we test who made it? Maybe you can make an argument. What's its purpose? Consumption, exactly. You can test it and maybe make assumptions of what its purpose is, but I think ultimately to know what the purpose of that is and why it's there is to ask the one who made it, correct? We in our Christian faith, I think, have a very amazing thing that not many do, that we have the words right in front of us to tell us the things of why we're here and how we came and why all this is here. And so I say that to say science can add so much to our faith and what we understand, and we need to bring those things together with an understanding that we have to be able to reason back to what is the most likely understanding of that science. We call that our biblical worldview. And we talk about that a lot of what's your biblical worldview and how does that look. And we want to have the biblical worldview of looking at things that are created, looking at science and saying, how does that look when I pass it through the test of what God's word says? I wrote that science often makes such bold claims about empirical science, and sounds very smart doing it, by the way, that we often just assume the historical science behind it without asking the questions. And so that's what the biblical worldview brings to light. My last visual here will be for CSI. Has anybody ever watched CSI before? Yeah? Okay, good. So let me ask you something. If you've watched it, you've ever seen them go through the crime scenes and they find, let's say, blood splatter, or they find like footprints somewhere or something like that? Do the footprints or the blood splatter or the evidence say anything to the people looking at the crime scene? Does the blood splatter like jump out and say, hey, this guy did it? Or does the footprint say, hey, he went here? No, it can't actually say anything. It's not a trick question either. It can't say anything. The people that are there, the specialists are there to interpret the evidence that's there, to look at the way maybe the blood splatter went, or which direction the footprints went, or what type of shoe they were wearing, or if there's a hair follicle, what kind of DNA was there. But what I want to get across to us, and I think it's going to be very helpful for us as we move forward if we go to the next slide, is that science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. And we often say science says something, but it actually doesn't. The people that are interpreting the evidence that they're looking at are the ones saying what science says. And so it's important to remember that just like we will look at anything, at the evidence, or look at something we're trying to figure out, and we interpret it, scientists will do the same thing. And it's all about what kind of worldview you bring to the table when you look at the evidence in front of you. And so that's why it's so important that we come to it with that biblical worldview in what we're doing. Are you still with us so far? Okay, thanks, Tino. Appreciate that. I want to point out Romans 1:19 through 20, and I'm going to read it for you here today. And if you want to open your Bibles to that, you can. Romans 1:19 through 20. I'll give you a moment to do that here. And this is talking about the point I made earlier about God and his effects and knowing God by his effects. It says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." God is saying that because of the way that we can look at nature and look at the things around us from the very beginning of time, all points to a creator, and a creator who created all things. And there's these 5 points that I learned by listening to Frank Turek, who's one of the apologists that we'll often reference throughout this whole thing. And he talks about the attributes of God. And these are important to understand when we talk about science and faith and how God fits into these. We need to understand who God is. And so he talks about 5 things. And when we look at the effect, and it points back to a cause, it will also point back to attributes of who God is. So we talk about design, creation, reason, the resurrection of Jesus, morality. They all point back to something. They point back to a designer. Creation points back to a creator. Reason points back to a mind and being able to think. Resurrection points back to a person who came on earth to be God. Morality points to a lawgiver. For all these to be true, God's attributes have to be these 5 things. I'm going to help you with them. So God has to be spaceless. God has to be timeless. God has to be immaterial or spirit. He has to be personal. And he has to be powerful. I'll run through those quick so I can give you some time. I know I'm going long here. God has to be spaceless, beyond space, because if space, time, and matter all came into existence at the same time, by definition, whatever created space, time, and matter cannot be made of space, time, and matter. And so in order for it to be created, God must be beyond time, beyond space, and beyond matter. But even more than that, if we're going to say that the God of the Bible created the universe, he must be personal because he chose to create. You have to be personal in order to choose, and he chose to create us. And he must be powerful when we look at how amazingly precise the things around us are put together. And so I would argue that when you put faith and science together, it leads to be the most reasonable explanation for what we know today as God being the creator behind all things. And the last point I would put is that often when I look at the complexity of everything around me and how gigantic the universe is, it often makes me feel small, insignificant sometimes, just this little dot and blip in the world. And yet may I remind you that we can look through telescopes and look at the complexity of everything and see how the design was made. And yet God's word says in Ephesians that we are his workmanship. And that workmanship piece is like the crown jewel of what he creates, right? So if you asked a carpenter, what is your workmanship? He would probably point to something he created that he's most proud of or most excited for. And the reality is, beyond everything God created, he points to you individually as that workmanship, the prized possession of what he created beyond all the beauty that we can see. So we're going to get into a lot of technicality here, but I want you to remember the intrinsic value that you have and you were created with, that beyond the beauty of everything else we see, if somebody asked God what is the most amazing thing he ever created, he would point to you. So don't forget that. So Michael, please take us into faith.
All right, in my 3 minutes?
You got 3 minutes, go.
All right, no, I'm just kidding. So a couple questions, if I'm
Oh, sure,
to ask.
yeah.
So would you say that my restatement is true, that science is beneficial and yet limited in what it can explain or describe about the world around us?
Yes, I would think that's accurate. I often think of gravity like this invisible force that we see that we can't quite explain. We can take an item that's the same weight and we can just drop it 500 times and get the calculations of its speed, how hard it's pulling, all of that kind of stuff. But what we can't do is go into a lab and create gravity to reproduce that gravity and change it and mold it. So we can see the effect of gravity, but we can't recreate it or really know how it was put together or made.
Okay. Yeah. And then would you also, it sounds like to me that science itself as an endeavor relies upon things that science can't study.
Correct.
True?
Yeah, correct. So like there are many, we talked about some of the constants that are there. It's not, it would be hard to say by chance that everything around us is very consistent. Science wouldn't be able to do tests or anything like that if this law of gravity was not the same every single time. And usually when things are left to random processes, they don't stay the same or stay consistent or get better. They usually get worse. Like if you've ever let a car sit out back in your yard for 20 years, you know it doesn't look better by the time you're done with it. It looks worse. And so in the same way that if we didn't have the constants of gravity or the general law of relativity or different things like that, we wouldn't be able to do science in the first place. And those are things we can't measure. And so science does rely on the things that God created in order to do science.
Okay, and so then finally, you would say a good worldview to explain all the entire world that we have, you would actually need something outside of science to have a full and clear explanation.
Correct. And I think you're going to do a good job of telling us what that is here.
Well, hopefully. So, spoiler alert, that's what I'm going to try to do. I just think this is a really important point. I think Christians in this conversation are always constantly playing defense. If you ever have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you about the origins of the universe or definitely disagrees with you about God and creation and Jesus, and you talk about some of the evidences for it. I've been involved in a lot of these, and it always feels like the burden of proof is always on me to somehow change this set in stone truth that we all know to be true, that is, science continues to discover that the Christian faith is irrelevant or something along those lines. And I think as Christians, I want us to be confident that actually, historically, and from an explanation of the world around us, the Christian faith offers the best answers to the most difficult questions. That doesn't mean there isn't some mystery element. There isn't some things that are just hard to understand. But I actually want us to have confidence. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and engage on that. So the first thing is we're going to talk about faith and what it is biblically. We're going to do this quickly, but I want to slow down on something that I think is often misunderstood about what the Christian faith is. So in Hebrews chapter 11, you can turn there. We have kind of a famous, if you've been in church for a while, this is kind of this is our definition of faith. And if you haven't ever heard this before, the Bible says a lot about what faith is. This is a passage that we often run to help us. It says, the writer of Hebrews says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. There's a lot in there. I want to take a moment, though. A lot of times in the definition of faith, we focus on, it's the belief in these invisible things we can't prove. That's a lot of times someone will use a working definition like this. And the Bible actually doesn't operate that way. God doesn't operate that way. It says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Why do we have assurance about what we do not see? Because there is assurance about what we do see. Mm-hmm. We have a God who broke into history, who actually engages in and with his creation and has revealed himself. So the things that we do not see, the hoped-for future, the promise of Jesus' return, the truth of God's existence, those are things that are actually based in what we have seen. In 1 John, I was just reading this with my kids and talking a little bit about it. And John, the apostle, says, what we have seen, what we have heard, what we have touched with our hands. And he's talking about his experience with Jesus, the Son of God. And so first, I want to say, as a Christian, there is historical, concrete, and visible evidence for our faith, as Josh talked about just the creation side of it. But also we have a God that has spoken to us and revealed himself to us. And then it says in verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And this speaks about the implied problem of why is there something rather than nothing? And that something can't make itself. There's got to be something that made it. Okay, when we look at creation and the world around us. So, a couple myths I want to talk about faith. And I don't have a lot of leading questions like Josh, okay? So don't be afraid. But who has heard the term, you just got to take a leap of faith? Okay? Anybody?
We're getting more interactive. This is good.
All right, this is good.
Better.
Okay, a few of us. Or it just takes faith. Has anyone heard a phrase like that? All right. All right. So I think a lot of times when we hear about faith, we actually think about what our culture says, this kind of irrational just belief. I just believe something. And this idea of a leap of faith, which I've actually heard in a lot of like kids' movies, this leap of faith actually comes from a area of philosophy that basically says there is no meaning and purpose, but to find your meaning and purpose, you have to invent it. You have to take a leap of faith, okay? And that slowly trickled down into our culture. Okay? Well, the Christian faith doesn't acknowledge that there's no purpose, no meaning, no explanation, nothing matters, so I have to just invent it and take a leap of faith, and somehow by taking this leap of faith, I'll find meaning. That's not the Christian faith whatsoever. And the other thing is a lot of people say, you just believe in fairy tales. Your faith is in a fairy tale. And any fair study of the Christian faith understands that there is rational, reasonable, historical evidence for our faith that differs far from any fairy tale connection. So those are some things when you talk with somebody, you need to explain, this is what I mean by faith. This is what I actually mean by what a biblical faith is. It's a response to evidence of God's revealed character, will, and personhood in the world. And it's a trust that that revelation is true and reliable. And it's a response to that, all right? So here's some things, and I like to mess with my students. I work in education. I like to mess with my students like this. So this might feel like a trick question, all right? And you can shout out yes or no, or you can say it's going to take more than yes or no to answer. And the best questions, that's usually a good answer. The number 7. I want us to think about the number 7, all right? Or 25 or 50 or 1,000, any number. Pick a number in your head. I would ask, does the number that you're thinking of actually exist? What do we think?
This has got to be a trick question.
Okay, Tino says yes. I agree, Tino. You can disagree with me then. Yes, all right, we got another yes. All right, so philosophers, which often get kind of ignored in our world, study things that are really boring like this, like what does it mean to exist? What is a thing that exists? And they have a whole category of things called abstract objects. Numbers, are included in that. So we use math to describe things. We describe laws of physics and nature. But we also have math and numbers to describe something that we know to be true, but we can't really prove is true. So like my students usually say, well, I can get 7 things. It's like, but that's not the number 7. That actually reflects that we need something called the number 7, but it's not the number 7. Here's another one. Does the law of non-contradiction exist?
Could you explain
Yes.
the law of non-contradiction?
Yeah, so we have an inherent understanding that certain things, you can't contradict yourself like this, okay? You can't have a square circle. That is a contradiction.
Or you can't say my brother was an only child.
Oh, I feel like that could get complicated, but I mean, Yes, we cannot contradict and pretend there's meaning. And we live our lives, we communicate. The entire world is built on these laws of logic. Do those things exist? Yes, they're real. We all could not live in any way without them. But can we study scientifically the laws of logic? Can we use science to prove that the number 7 exists? No, and philosophers call these objects abstract objects. And my point is this: there's more to the world than what science can explain. Mm-hmm. And we all know that. And in fact, there's things in the world that demand an explanation, but you can't get it through science alone. So, the Christian faith speaks to these things, that this ordered universe that has things that science relies upon and we rely upon and assume that we have a God of order who made the universe and made it work in such a way that these things are true, and we have a source for that. And the Christian faith can explain where those things came from. The pew didn't make the laws of logic, okay? That didn't happen. And we all know that to be true. If someone came along and said that, we'd say that doesn't make sense, okay? So, the Christian faith has a source and explanation. It's based in evidence, in historical evidence. And obviously we can debate the evidence. You can have interpretations, as Josh has pointed out. But the Christian faith offers a holistic explanation of not just what we see in front of us, and not just science and what science discovers, but all the things that science and we live our lives assuming and presuming. So, as I wrap up so that we can get to the Q&A in a timely way, I want to answer this, and this might feel awkward. I want to ask the question, is evolution the silver bullet? And I say that before anyone shouts out a yes or no. It's a rhetorical. I say that not because I'm necessarily against evolution, and you can't, if evolution were to be demonstrated to be true in a way that beyond what they've demonstrated, the Christian faith can't integrate. In fact, there's Christians that do try to integrate those two things. But the origin of evolution, no pun intended, the origin of evolution was intended to explain the apparent design in the universe. And so I think it's important to speak to, if you are someone in this room that says, well, I don't believe in God and evolution is a helpful tool for me to make sense of the world. I think it's important to consider that evolution, like many areas of science, have its challenges and its flaws. And I want to speak to that briefly before we go to a Q&A. So, see these books here? Josh asked me to bring books and I completely forgot. Which is probably good because it might end up being too many books because he has a lot of books here. Well, one of the books I wanted to bring was written by a guy by the name of Stephen Meyer. Great work in terms of how science helps us understand that a creator God exists and how the Christian God best fits the evidence. He's a great resource for that. Well, he has a conversation around Darwinian evolution and the problems with it. So when Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, there was a lot that had yet to be discovered in the 19th century about the world that we would find. And so his explanation was that through variation in our world, this tool, natural selection, which is just time and the strength and survival of a species, explains the variation. And he tried to reverse engineer that explanation to the origin of all species. Well, later on, we discovered the power and wonder that is genetics. And scientists were amazed at the amount of information that gets passed down and the amazing, incredible code that is in genetics. And so it's called Mendelian genetics. And so
It's
they
like
had
the
to
code in your DNA, correct?
Yes.
Got
And so
it.
it's
Yep.
like binary code for computers is like 2 numbers. Well, DNA operates on 4. We've been able to identify that. Well, basically, the whole theory of evolution had to be changed, adjusted, because random variants, now we understand genetics. And since the 50s, science has been trying to explain how all of this information inside of our genetics, and can you guys put up this, did you get him the slide?
I did get him the slides. I did my job.
The cell. The crazy looking. All right. So another cool thing that scientists did with AI is they actually gave AI instructions to make this image based on all that we know is in a cell. This is one single cell, okay? So one thing that evolution is grappling with is how do we actually, where does this information come from and how does it pass on? Because evolution says, well, the mutation in our genetics, enough of that happens, so then variation happens from these mutations, and those mutations have changed us as a species. And there's a lot of problems with that, and I would just ask you to investigate how much information is in a cell and how much goes on. The cell actually translates the message from the DNA to the messenger RNA, and the messenger RNA translate that information to a different language into an amino acid, which goes out and makes a protein, and that's one single protein, and proteins do jobs in our body. Evolution has no way to sufficiently explain where this information came from.
Could you even say that because there's code and information, just like we talk cause and effect, like we see DNA, we see code that would point back to a coder.
Yes.
Or information would point back to a mind.
Yes, there is no example of information in code in our world where an intelligent being has placed it in. And this level of complexity is far beyond anything we can replicate. And so this is just one of the many challenges to the theory of evolution they can't explain. And I would just ask you, if you rely upon evolution as part of your worldview, to just ask those questions and just speak to that. And so there's more that could be said, and I want to save that for the Q&A. But I believe that the Christian faith can take all of what science continues to discover and change about what it studies. And the Christian faith can actually absorb that and see that it bolsters our faith. It doesn't actually reduce it. And that we can have confidence that even if we don't have all the answers, and as science changes about what it sees in the universe around us and what we see, the Christian faith can stand up to it and actually has a better explanation for why we have that. So
cool. That was
all
good.
Right. Hopefully.
Appreciate that. I want to give it a few minutes here to try and get a few questions if you wrote any down anyways. So Baker's got a microphone up here, and we've got like 10-ish minutes to go through, and then we can dismiss you, and then you can get your kids, and then you can also stay if you want. But if you have any questions so far, raise your hand. Baker's going to come around, and he's going to bring you a mic test question. Preface that, we're not experts. We'll try and answer it the best we can. And one of the things we've learned also is that sometimes when people are asking you about your faith or anything else, sometimes saying I don't know is okay.
Yep.
But getting back to them is important. Go ahead.
Do you believe that verbal communication is part of evidence? Because you think of Adam telling whoever his kids were, and then their kids telling some other their kids about God. And so it's just like me listening to my dad about our generations. There was no DNA, there was no genealogy, but he was telling me who his dad was and then his grandfather.
Yeah.
So we take that by word. It's the same way when we preach the gospel, it's from word of mouth, and that's what God says, you know.
Yeah, I would say yes, because communication is how we get this. And when we look at this, and if we want to know this is true, not only can we have faith, but we can have faith based on evidence, like you said. So we can actually go back into archaeology and see that everything that this talks about basically lines up with the archaeology that we see. There's testimony in here, first-person testimony. You could go back and look at your genealogy. You could go back to where your parents and grandparents were buried, and you can see their names, and you can know that they were real. So I would say yes, as long as you go back and you reason it through evidence. Yeah.
I would actually also add, there are obviously limitations to verbal testimony, but we have a modern bias that we assume that we are more reliable now than people have ever been, and we should just question and look critically, specifically at biblical evidence in terms of testimony and witness. And none of us really live that way. And actually, if we investigated the Christian faith in terms of testimony, has a coherence and a sheer number of confirmation that would actually, there wouldn't even be a question compared to things that we assume as well. So, good. I know we had two. Perfect.
Sorry, this is my weird voice I have here. So I got a question about numbers. You said
Oh, no.
something about them not representing anything. Or maybe need some clarification, but
Were you talking about when he was talking about the 4 digits in the DNA code?
no, like
You
the
mean when I
number
asked,
7.
like, does 7
yeah.
exist or not? Yep.
Right.
So, yeah.
But didn't God create the earth and rested on the 7th day? He gave us an actual definitive day that things were made, and a 7 meant 7.
I would actually,
Yes.
that's exactly what I was trying to say, is that we use that language to represent something real. So I would say that our language, the name 7 for the thing that is a 7, absolutely does mean something in reality, and it does describe. So I'd actually say that that's definitely.
You'd say that you can't, if I asked you for 7 loaves of bread, you could give me 7 loaves of bread, but if I asked you for the number 7, you couldn't give it to me.
I can't.
You could write it on a paper as a representation of the number 7, but you can't physically give me the number 7. And so I think, although the number can still be real and still be a representation of something. So
And yeah, and the whole point there is that science can't tell you the number 7, but it uses it.
Right.
So,
That's good.
all right,
Good
another
question.
question.
Neil.
All right, so you talked about nature and intelligent design and the cell and things like that. And this is something that I think of probably way more than a normal person would.
I love
Welcome
that.
to the club.
But when you look at any living thing, I'm talking animal, bird, trees, flowers, whatever, everything has a system of reproduction, which if you look at it, every element of that reproduction is in some way the same in everything. It doesn't matter if you're a flower or a person or a bird, that system is the same. Is there, and this is a legitimate question I'm asking, and you probably don't know, but is there anything in this world that exists and relies upon division of itself to reproduce without that male-female component? I know worms are whatever, but still there's not, it actually uses that same system to produce another worm. But is there anything that divides itself and continues to exist? Because if it didn't divide itself, it would not exist any longer.
I don't know. I've divided hostas so many times and I can't kill them. So So you're basically asking, does anything come into creation by just duplicating itself rather than the natural process of reproduction?
Correct.
Not that I'm aware of.
And I would just say that the system of natural reproduction would actually point back to intelligent design
100%.
through God.
Yeah, the fact that two things can come together and then in an instant create perfect code to create human beings is something science still can't figure out. I tell everybody, they would always say, why do you believe what you believe? I said, I've always believed what I believed, but as soon as my first son was born, I never questioned whether God existed or not, because you can't, how does life come about? Like, it's just this amazing, beautiful thing that I think, gosh, you see a baby being born, you can't doubt who God is and that he created us. It's amazing.
Got time for probably one more?
Probably one more and then we'll dismiss, but then you can still stay after if you want, so.
Hey, did you guys realize that God create like electricity, like our typewriters, radio stations, and all the wire stuff? Do you guys believe in that?
Yeah, God created all the things around us. We get to put all the things together and make stuff with it, but he originally created it all, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I believe in. Because, you guys know I'm a musician. You guys know that.
Yeah.
I'm a music person for you guys here.
It's good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll say if you have kids, if you need to leave and you want to go, you are dismissed at this point. If you'd like to stay and hear some questions or ask questions, please hang out. Baker will keep passing the mic around here for a little bit. So if you got a question, go ahead and raise your hand and you can ask it. We would just ask that if you do go quietly, please, while we still discuss. Baker, come up here so you can see if anybody's got questions. If not, we'll call it a, hey, best question gets the cake, so. Oh, Larry's got a question.
You talked about cakes.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll ask the question once I get the piece of cake.
Yeah, go ahead and get it.
Yeah. No, and I think the word that Neil was looking for when he talked about worms was slimy.
Oh, sure.
That's a good answer.
Yep. We have heard descriptions of the age of objects by use of carbon dating, half-life, and that's about as far as I could explain it. But and I trust that because it's been used in what I've observed reliably for years and years, what should we make of that if we are those that believe in a younger Earth as opposed to a much older Earth?
Yeah, I would say that carbon dating in and of itself, I think, has its flaws, and it's been proven its flaws over the years. I think there is some small validity to it, but I would actually question it a lot more than I would say that it's fully true, and welcome to disagree in any way. But we've seen over time where we have tested, let's say, a piece of wood and said that this piece of wood came from a shipwreck that was from 6,000 years ago and, whatever. And then we take another piece of wood, let's say, from a brand new tree, but we don't tell the person we're doing that, and we carbon test it, and they say, oh, this has been here for 16,000 years, and it came from this, and the contradictions that you can see when you really look at carbon dating is that it doesn't have a lot of accuracy, and there's a giant window of where it could be wrong in its dates, and so
and those are well documented. I want to point out those are well documented. They're just not talked about. Yep. So it's well documented. It's not just Christians saying it. Carbon dating is at times unreliable. Though there is something to it.
Sure.
But to rely upon that as a sole reason to understand the age of something has been. Yeah. There can be suspicion, space for suspicion.
A quick description of it is that we have basically a couple or few hundred years of observable carbon. The way that they look at it is how did the carbon break down? And so we only have a few hundred years of how carbon is broken down. We take that template and assume it's been the same for centuries and base our calculations off that, when really we don't know whether it breaks down faster or slower as they age, and so they can't really date them as well because of that. So
it's a good question.
Yeah, it's good. Any other questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, Tino's got another one back here. Go ahead, Tino.
Well, is that a question or a sermon? That's the key.
We all use it by the skin of our teeth. David and Goliath, the writings on the wall, and there's so many other words that the Bible that we use, the human race uses to describe certain things.
Yep.
I mean, that alone is proof alone that the word is true.
Yeah.
Because we use, even the secular world uses it
Yeah.
to describe things.
It's good. It's good. For those of you who are still in the room, I'm assuming you have some slight interest in this. Can you throw that slide up? I forgot to say it when everybody was in here, but we have a engagement hour series that's actually coming up where we are going over apologetics, which is a lot of what we talked about tonight, which is basically having an answer for your faith. And it's going to be a combined engagement hour with Dan's class, with our youth class, and with Tim's class. It's going to be in here, and it's going to be starting in September, I think going through December. And we're going to go through all of the different arguments, whether it's the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and all of those different things about how we know God exists and how we can have answers for those things. And if those things don't make sense, just come and pay attention and be a part of it. It's going to be a lot of fun starting in September for our Engagement Hour series. So thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. And ask us questions after if you want. You can come look at some of the resources we have up here if you'd like to.